Topic: Evolution, Speciation and Artificial Selection, Reproductive Isolation Mechanisms, Evolution in Present Times. Aims of lesson. At the end of this lesson you should be able to define terminology such as speciation, biological species, population, artificial selection, etc. Identify the differences and similarities between artificial selection and natural selection. Know the reproductive isolation mechanisms. Apply your knowledge of natural selection to examples in present times. Introduction. You have studied Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection in Lesson 1. You also had to differentiate between a species and a population in Lesson 1. Concepts and skills. Study the following definitions. Note that at least 2 marks are awarded if you can define a term correctly in the examination. Population, a group of organisms of the same species, found in the same habitat at the same time. Species, a group of organisms with similar characteristics that are able to interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Speciation, the evolutionary process during which new species form. Natural selection, the mechanism of evolution where nature selects the individuals with favorable characteristics for survival. Artificial selection, the deliberate breeding of plants and animals by humans for desired characteristics that would not necessarily benefit the survival of the offspring. Extinction, the permanent disappearance of a species from Earth. Speciation. Study the generic account of speciation through geographic isolation. If a population of a single species becomes separated by a geographical barrier, sea, river, mountain, lake, then the population splits into 2. There is now no gene flow between the 2 populations. Since each population may be exposed to different environmental conditions / the selection pressure may be different. Natural selection occurs independently in each of the 2 populations, such that the individuals of the 2 populations become very different from each other, genotypically and phenotypically. Even if the 2 populations were to mix again, they will not be able to interbreed. The 2 populations are now different species. Note, it is a population and not a species that becomes separated by a geographical barrier. Refer to the definition of a population and a species. You should now be able to apply the generic account of speciation on any given examples in a test or examination. Explain how speciation and extinction affect biodiversity. Speciation increases biodiversity since there is an increase in the number of species. Extinction results in the loss of the number of species and therefore results in a decrease in biodiversity. Artificial selection. Humans select organisms with a particular desirable characteristic and interbreed them with other organisms that also have the same desirable characteristic to improve this characteristic further in the offspring. They may also choose organisms with different desirable characteristics to get offspring with a combination of these desirable characteristics. Differences between artificial selection and natural selection. Natural selection, artificial selection. The environment or nature is the selective force. Humans represent the selective force. Selection is in response to suitability to the environment. Selection is in response to satisfying human needs. Occurs within a species may involve one or more species, as in crossbreeding. Reproductive isolating mechanisms. You should be able to name and describe the following 5 reproductive isolation mechanisms that keep species separate. Breeding at different times of the year. Species-specific courtship behavior. Adaptation to different pollinators. Infertile offspring. Prevention of fertilization. Evolution in present times. Use one example and describe the role of mutations in evolution in present times. In a population of insects/bacteria/HI. Viruses/Galapagos finches. Mutations are a source of variation, which may make some organisms more resistant to insecticides/antibiotics/antiretroviral medication. Those individuals that are not resistant will die, whereas those that are resistant will survive. To pass the resistant allele/resistance on to their offspring. This is known as natural selection. As a result, individuals of the future generations will be resistant to the insecticides/antibiotics/antiretroviral medication. Common errors made by learners in examinations. Learners incorrectly indicate that a species instead of a population separates by a geographical barrier. When they give a generic account of speciation, learners cannot differentiate between a species and a population. Learners do not know the differences between artificial selection and natural selection. Learners cannot apply their knowledge of speciation and artificial selection on different examples and in different contexts. Consolidation. Define all the terminology relevant to the topic/is covered in this lesson. Write a general explanation of speciation. Apply your general knowledge of speciation on any other examples/scenarios. Note, the knowledge and skills gained in this section will help you to have a better understanding of the following sections of evolution that you still need to deal with, i.e., human evolution. Expanded activity. Conduct research on the following real-life scenarios linked to the topic of natural selection. HIV resistance to antiretroviral medication. Resistance of TB bacteria to antibiotics. Resistance of insects to insecticides.